Courtroom 3 of the Aldridge County Courthouse was enveloped in an atmosphere so tense it felt suffocating. No whispers, no tapping of pens. Every eye in the room was fixed on the heavy wooden door as it slowly creaked open. A little girl, around 5 years old, with softly curled brown hair, stepped inside. Her tiny hand clutched the deep red leash tightly. Beside her walked a large Belgian shepherd, strong, majestic, with a long, jagged scar running from shoulder to hip like a battle wound. Her name was Lena Moore, and the dog's name was Shadow. At the judge's bench, Gregory Mason, a seasoned judge who had presided over more than 200 complex criminal cases, leaned slightly forward. His eyes, which had seen both guilt and redemption, paused on the girl, taking cautious yet determined steps toward the witness stand. Lena was the sole witness in a failed child abduction case. If her testimony held up, it could put Jonas Weller, a 46-year-old systems engineer, behind bars for life. But there was a problem. Lena hadn't spoken a word since the day she was attacked. From the defense table, Weller sat motionless, his eyes hidden behind thin glasses. His expression was unreadable, yet there was a sense of quiet arrogance, like he believed no one in the room could truly touch him. There were no physical witnesses, no confession. And their only chance rested on a traumatized child who had not spoken since the incident. Defense attorney Clarence Drew had built his entire case around that fact, challenging the reliability of a young girl with selective mutism. But what no one had anticipated was that Lena's silence carried another language, one only one in that room could understand. The moment Lena sat down, she looked at Weller. Her eyes widened, her small fingers twitched, a barely visible motion that would have seemed meaningless to anyone else. But it was a coded signal, practiced in therapy sessions with Shadow, a secret language meant for moments when words failed her. Only two in the room recognized it, Shadow and Judge Mason. Shadow's body immediately tensed. His ears pricked up. A deep, low growl rumbled from his chest. Not aggressive, but a clear warning. The entire courtroom froze. Not because they believed in dogs, but because human instinct recognizes when a creature senses danger. Attorney Drew leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation." But Judge Mason rose from his chair and slammed the gavel so hard the sound echoed like thunder. "Court will recess for 20 minutes. I need to speak with the prosecution privately." Lena clung to Shadow's fur as if her life depended on it. Out in the hallway, her mother, Marissa Moore, knelt beside her, pulling her daughter into her arms. Nearby stood Henry Callan, retired FBI agent and lead investigator. He observed in silence, then whispered, "Something just changed. And this isn't just instinct. It's a signal." Inside the defense chamber, Weller was no longer calm. He crossed his arms, eyes fixed on the wall in front of him. "The girl didn't speak," he muttered. "But the dog knows." Drew looked up for the first time and saw hesitation in his client's face, a man who had been cold as ice until now. There was something about Shadow that unsettled Weller, as if the dog could see right through him. 20 minutes later, the courtroom reconvened, but the energy had shifted. Prosecutor Elaine Trask requested that Shadow be allowed to remain on the witness stand. This time, no one objected. "Lena," she said gently, "if you feel comfortable, could you point to the person who approached you that day?" Lena said nothing, but after a pause, her small arm rose. She pointed directly at Jonas Weller. The room erupted in whispers. Drew objected immediately, but Judge Mason raised his hand to silence him. "The court will determine the credibility of the identification." Elaine leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Did that man say anything to you, Lena?" Still, Lena remained silent. But then, almost as if something deep inside her stirred, her hand made another subtle gesture. The second therapy signal, and Shadow understood. He rose from the floor. A deeper growl rolled from his chest. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the accused. The entire courtroom held its breath. Weller, for the first time since the trial began, was visibly shaking. Behind the courtroom, in the judge's private chamber, Judge Harold Benton stood in front of a tall mirror, adjusting the collar of his black robe. His eyes lingered on his reflection, aged by time, and shaped by over 3 decades of verdicts, both harsh and fair. But today, something felt different. A child who didn't speak. A dog who reacted on pure instinct. A defendant whose expression changed in the blink of an eye. Benton didn't believe in coincidences, and he certainly didn't believe in theatrical performances. But the way Shadow, the therapy dog, had growled during a seemingly calm moment was impossible to ignore. His wasn't just muscle memory. It was something deeper. It was recognition. And if he was right, this could be the missing piece to crack the armor around this carefully constructed case finally. Outside, in the long hallway tiled in shades of white and grey, Lena Moore sat with her back against the wall, her fingers wound tightly around Shadow's leash, as if it were an invisible shield. Her tiny face, once glowing in the home videos played earlier by the prosecution, where she had sung, told stories and pretended to be a princess in her make-believe castle, now appeared hollow and exhausted. Her mother, Marissa Moore, sat beside her, gently running fingers through her daughter's hair. "Sweetheart, I'm right here," she whispered, but Lena didn't respond. She simply buried her face into Shadow's fur, her small shoulders trembling. It had been a clear April afternoon. The sky was unusually blue and the West Hollow neighborhood bloomed with tulips and the scent of fresh cedar. Lena, in her white floral dress, was spinning joyfully in the backyard. She giggled, clutching her faded green stuffed rabbit. From the kitchen window, Marissa watched with a soft smile. Her husband, Brian, was on his way home after a long shift in the ER. She was planning to cook his favorite, roasted salmon. Life felt peaceful, normal, safe. At 4:06 p.m., the phone rang. It was her sister from Portland who was calling about a school application for her son. Marissa stepped inside for just a few minutes. But when she returned, her world had changed. The backyard gate, always closed, was wide open. No laughter, no white dress fluttering. Lena was still there. But she wasn't alone. A strange man wearing a grey shirt was crouching beside her. His face bore a soft smile, but something about it felt off. Cold, calculated. "Do you like puppies?" he whispered. "I've got a few waiting in my van. They're really sweet." The old black van was parked just beyond the fence, its side doors slightly ajar. Then instinct, pure maternal instinct, kicked in before reason. "Lena!" Marissa's scream cut through the air like a lightning bolt. The man turned. His smile vanished, replaced by sharp, predatory eyes. In one swift motion, he grabbed Lena's arm. She didn't scream. She didn't pull away. Her eyes widened, frozen in terror, a reaction no child should ever have to endure. But in that fleeting second of hesitation, Marissa reached her daughter, pulling her into her arms. The man fled, climbed into the van, and sped off, leaving behind black skid marks and unanswered questions. Since that day, Lena hadn't spoken a word. The diagnosis was immediate. Acute psychological trauma, selective mutism. Therapies were tried. Psychologists came and went. But no one could truly reach her. Until Shadow entered her life, a retired police canine now trained as a therapy dog. And slowly, something miraculous began to happen. Back in the courtroom, the 15-minute recess was almost over. And in just a few moments, everything would change. Judge Harold Benton took a deep breath. He turned and walked back to the bench. For the first time since the trial began, he felt the scales of justice tilt. Not because of testimony, but because of a single gesture and a growl from a loyal creature. "It's time," he thought, glancing toward the defendant. He thinks only humans can uncover the truth. But perhaps Shadow is the sharpest witness in this courtroom. Across the street, Mrs. Edith Langley, a retired nurse, was out walking her old terrier Milo, like she did every afternoon. Her steps were slow, but her gaze remained sharp, the same sharpness that once made her a trusted professional at the county hospital. When she caught sight of the scene across the yard, a man crouching beside a little girl, her instincts flared. The nurse in her, the mother in her, both lit up at once. Without hesitation, her voice rang out, hoarse but firm and commanding. "Get away from that child!" The man was startled. He looked at her, then back at the girl. For the briefest moment, his grip loosened. And that was all it took. Lena Moore yanked her hand free and ran toward her mother. "Marissa, who was already sprinting like a storm across the lawn. Marissa scooped her daughter into her arms, trembling but holding on as if she could shield her child from the world itself. The black van roared to life, tires screeching against the pavement, leaving behind 2 dark skid marks, then vanished around the corner. But peace didn't return. Marissa could feel her heart pounding in her chest while Lena buried her face into her mother's shoulder, trembling. No tears, no words, just a silence so heavy it hurt. Less than 5 minutes later, police cruisers and an ambulance arrived on the scene. Leading the response was Detective Noel Hartman, a seasoned veteran of the abduction task force. Grey hair, sharp eyes, and a weathered notebook in hand. He had seen far too many cases like this one. This pattern, same approach, same precision, he muttered, flipping through his notes. 4 kids missing in the last 18 months, all snatched near home, all lured with pets or small rewards. Beside him, FBI agent Talia Reese, a child trauma specialist, knelt beside Lena. Her voice was gentle, like a breeze. "Sweetheart, can you tell me what the man looked like?" No response. Lena clung to her mother's shirt, head still buried in Marissa's chest. Marissa gently stroked her daughter's hair, holding back tears. "I'm here, baby. You're safe now." But Lena's eyes were vacant. No nod, no shake of the head. It was as if someone had flipped off the switch that once gave her a voice. "She hasn't spoken a word since I picked her up," Marissa whispered to Talia, her eyes brimming. Not one sound. Talia exchanged a glance with Hartman. "Selective mutism," she said softly. "Classic trauma response." "Do we have anything to go on?" Hartman asked. "Very little," Talia replied. "A man, a black van, no clear plates." Almost as if on cue, Mrs. Langley approached, Milo circling her feet excitedly. "I saw part of the license plate," she said. "The first 3 letters were YKZ, I'm sure of it." Hartman nodded. "Enough to start." But for the Moore family, the battle was just beginning. In the days that followed, Lena withdrew completely. She no longer ran through the garden. She stopped drawing in colour. She feared cars. I heard the doorbell. Feared the eyes of strangers. Marissa and Brian, her parents, tried everything. Old toys, favourite meals, bedtime stories. But Lena stayed silent. She didn't sleep through the night. And when she did, nightmares left her gasping awake, eyes wide with fear. One late night, Marissa sat with Brian in the kitchen. Her eyes were sunken from exhaustion. "The therapist, they suggested something," she said quietly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile stillness around them. "An emotional support animal." Brian rubbed his forehead, weariness heavy in his eyes. "Do you think it'll help?" Marissa didn't answer right away. She held her tea close, fingers trembling. "I don't know. But if it's the only hope we have, it's worth trying." What neither of them knew, what no one in that room could have predicted, was that this decision would change everything. Lena Moore had lost her voice 2 weeks prior to the incident. No one had been able to reach her inner world until a creature stepped in, one who didn't need language to connect. And his name was Shadow. Inside the Havenfield Centre for Animal Behavioural Recovery, the air was heavy with the scent of antiseptic and faint musk from animal fur. Soft light filtered through the wide windows, illuminating the white-tiled floor. There was only the sound of a ticking clock and the occasional tap of claws against the tile. On a specialised bed near the window lay a large Belgian shepherd, silent and still. His dark brown eyes were deep and alert, as if they could read the thoughts of the world. His old name was Shadow. A decorated former police canine, Shadow had rescued hostages during drug raids, detected explosives in crowded terminals, and served on the front lines. Now, he was waiting, and for a little girl who no longer had words, but still had hope. Now, Shadow carried a deep scar along his right flank, where a knife had once torn through muscle and ligament during a child rescue mission. Though he survived, the medical team concluded he could no longer serve in the field. He was placed on the decommission list and is awaiting permanent retirement. That is, until Dr. Rowan Hale, a specialist in animal behavioural rehabilitation and founder of the Havenfield Therapeutic Animal Program, stepped in to challenge the decision. He believed that Shadow's instinct, intelligence, and unwavering loyalty could still save lives, just in a different way. That very afternoon, Marissa Moore brought Lena to Havenfield. Her eyes were filled with a fragile blend of hope and hesitation. She had never imagined the answer to her daughter's silence could come from an animal. Lena, once a bright, chatty child who loved fairy tales and becoming the characters within them, now hid behind her mother's skirt, her gaze frozen with memories too painful to speak of. Dr. Rowan knelt, his voice gentle and calm. "Hello, Lena. I'm Rowan. I work with very special dogs. Dogs who help children like you overcome the scary things." There was no reply, only a glance towards Shadow, who sat several steps away. He didn't move, didn't bark. He simply waited, patient and calm. "You don't have to touch him if you don't want to," Rowan said softly. "Shadow won't come closer unless you give him permission. But if you reach out, he'll know you're ready." Marissa held her breath, her heart tightening as Lena's small hand slowly lifted, trembling, hesitant, yet full of silent resolve. Shadow didn't move until Rowan gave a slight nod. Then, with quiet grace, the Belgian shepherd took slow, deliberate steps until his warm breath touched Lena's palm. A connection sparked. Lena's hand curved gently, brushing against his thick, coarse fur. Shadow didn't flinch. He simply lowered his head, allowing her to explore, at her rhythm. "Oh my God," Marissa whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. That's the first time she's reached out to anyone. Since that day. From that moment on, Shadow became inseparable from Lena. At home, she would sit beside him for hours, tracing the scar on his side like it was a path between their souls. When nightmares pulled her from sleep, it was the steady rhythm of his breathing and the weight of his body that anchored her from the edge of panic. She still didn't speak, but she started drawing again. Crayon sketches of a little girl and a big dog, walking through forests, standing on bridges, lying under starlit skies. Then, one afternoon, inside Rowan's office, as Shadow lifted his paw for a simple trick, Lena whispered two quiet words, "Good dog." Marissa spun around. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. But then, she saw Lena's lips moving, her eyes wide in disbelief at herself, and she knew. A miracle had begun. Rowan gently placed his hand on Marissa's arm. She trusts Shadow, and sometimes trust is the first step toward finding your voice again. Marissa said nothing. She simply squeezed his hand, grateful, overwhelmed, and silently vowed, "We will follow wherever that trust leads." Some journeys begin in pain, but lead us to places we never imagined, where the truth can no longer stay buried. And for Lena Moore, that place was Courtroom 7. The main courtroom at City Hall was packed. Every seat was filled with journalists, lawyers, forensic specialists, and silent observers. All eyes focused on the center stage, where one of the most controversial trials in recent memory was about to begin. At the heart of the room sat Jonas Weller, the defendant, a 46-year-old computer engineer charged with attempted child abduction. There was no confession, no physical evidence. And the only witness was a child who didn't speak. He sat calmly, fingers tapping rhythmically on the polished wood table. His gaze forward, challenging the room. On the other side, Lena, only 5 years old, sat beside her mother. Her tiny hand clenched the deep red leash that connected to Shadow, resting quietly beneath her. This Belgian shepherd was the only being Lena had trusted since the incident. His ears stood alert. His dark eyes flicked occasionally toward Weller, as if waiting for a familiar scent. Something no adult could detect, but he could feel. "All rise," the clerk announced as Judge Harold Benton entered. His black robe swept across the wooden floor. He scanned the room, but his eyes lingered just a moment longer on Lena and Shadow. He had allowed Shadow's presence at the trial, a decision many criticized. But Judge Benton believed this was more than emotional support. Shadow might just be the final key to unlocking the truth. As opening procedures concluded, defense attorney Marcus Lane stood. "Your Honor, with all due respect, the presence of such a large animal in this courtroom is unfair. It may emotionally sway the jury, leading to bias." Prosecutor Caroline Vega immediately countered, "Shadow is not here for sentiment. He's part of a court-approved treatment plan for Lena, who has been diagnosed with psychological mutism. Without Shadow, Lena cannot testify. Judge Benton paused for several seconds, then said firmly, "I have reviewed the medical documents and expert recommendations. Shadow will remain." The courtroom buzzed with low murmurs, some in support, others dissenting. But the decision was final. Then came the moment. Lena was led to the witness stand. Marissa held her hand as they walked slowly forward. Her small feet trembled, but her eyes no longer held the fear they once did. Shadow walked beside her, step by step, mirroring her breath. Marissa gently seated her daughter, then stepped back. Every gaze in the room remained fixed. Caroline approached with care. "Hello, Lena. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Just nod or shake your head, okay?" Lena didn't move at first. She looked down at her hands, then at Shadow. Sensing her unease, Shadow pressed gently against her leg, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Lena lowered her head slightly and nodded. Caroline continued, each question soft and measured. "Do you recognize the man who approached you that day?" A long pause. Then Lena raised her arm, slowly, deliberately, and pointed directly at Jonas Weller. The courtroom froze. Weller clenched his jaw, but showed no other reaction. Shadow did. His ears snapped up. His nose twitched. A soft whine escaped, not a growl, but the instinctive response of recognition. It wasn't random. It wasn't trained. It was confirmation. A silent witness had spoken. And from that very moment, the trial was no longer just a legal debate. It became a journey to uncover the truth, where a girl who couldn't speak and a dog who didn't need to shatter the silence together. Inside the courtroom, the only sound was the ticking of the clock, as if counting down to the moment when the truth would finally surface. Lena Moore, just 5 years old, sat trembling, clutching the deep red leash that connected her to Shadow, the loyal therapy dog who had never left her side since that fateful day. Prosecutor Caroline Vega leaned in, speaking softly. "Lena, can you tell us who was with you in the yard that day?" No one in the room dared to breathe. Lena didn't raise her head, but after a few frozen seconds, her small hand slowly lifted and pointed, straight at Jonas Weller, the defendant sitting at the far end of the room. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Weller's face remained stoic, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash, a sudden, involuntary clench of the jaw. Defense attorney Marcus Lane jumped up. "Your Honor, this identification is invalid. The child was previously exposed to images of my client. This could have influenced her perception." Judge Harold Benton simply raised a hand. "The jury will determine the credibility of the witness." Caroline took a small step closer. "Did that person say anything to you that day, Lena?" Lena didn't answer, but her small hand moved again, a subtle gesture, a unique signal that only Shadow understood. The dog reacted instantly. His ears perked, his gaze locked on Weller. A low, warning growl rumbled from his chest, not aggressive, but unmistakable recognition. The courtroom held its breath. Lane stood again, this time visibly tense. "Your Honor, this is theatrics. That dog was trained to react this way." But Judge Benton didn't respond right away. He stared at Shadow, eyes sharp as a blade. He had presided over many cases involving canine units. He knew the difference between trained behavior and pure instinct. "Miss Vega," he asked slowly, "has this dog ever displayed a similar reaction to anyone else in this courtroom?" Caroline shook her head. "Not once, Your Honor." Judge Benton turned his gaze to the defendant. For the first time, Jonas Weller clenched his fists. The veins on his neck stood out visibly. Just then, a member of the prosecution team rushed out of the courtroom. A new lead had surfaced. Minutes later, Caroline requested a 15-minute recess. As the court adjourned, darkness began to lift. New forensic evidence had just arrived. A strange soil sample found in Weller's van matched a very specific location in the northern suburbs, an abandoned log cabin. Agent Monroe, who had investigated child abduction cases for 20 years, immediately recognized that soil. He exhaled deeply. "We need to go. Now." And Shadow followed. No one objected. When the team arrived at the cabin, the silence was unnerving. The surrounding woods rustled. Dust covered everything, but fresh footprints were leading to the back door. And when Shadow began growling and stiffening his posture, everyone knew this was no longer a theory. They pried open the wooden floor. Beneath it lay a narrow spiral staircase leading to a cold, damp basement. As flashlights swept across rough concrete walls, they saw what they had hoped not to see but couldn't look away from: a child's backpack, tiny shoes, and in the far corner, a little girl, chained to a pipe, Emma Clark, 8 years old, missing for over 5 months. Her hair was tangled. She looked frail, silent, but she was alive. When Shadow approached, Emma let out a soft, shattered sob, as if hope had finally reached her. Monroe gently lifted her into his arms. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." That day, the story didn't just change the courtroom. It changed my life. But because of a silent child and a dog that never gave up, at the end of what seemed like a hopeless path, they found what mattered most: life and truth. In the musty air of a hidden basement beneath the old cabin, the investigative team followed a narrow passage underground. This flashlight swept across dusty shelves, worn teddy bears, tiny sneakers, and finally, a faded pink backpack. There, in the corner, a girl shackled to a pipe, Emma Clark, 8 years old. Gone for 6 months. Her face was pale. Her eyes first filled with fear, then relief. "Help me," she whispered, her voice hoarse from silence. In that instant, Shadow lunged forward on his leash, whining, as if sensing her pain. Monroe rushed in, broke the chain, and cradled the girl in his arms. "You're safe now, sweetheart. We're going to take you home." Emma didn't cry. She just held tightly to his coat, her small body still shaking from the darkness she'd survived. As news of her rescue spread like wildfire, the courtroom was once again full. Jonas Weller, the man who had denied every accusation, now sat visibly shaken at the defendant's table. Prosecutor Caroline Vega approached the bench. "Your Honor, DNA from the rope used to restrain Emma was found on the defendant. The soil from his vehicle matched exactly with the cabin site. And most importantly, Emma Clark is alive. She can testify." The room went silent. At that moment, Shadow, resting beneath Lena, lifted his head and let out a low growl. His eyes fixed on the defendant. Weller began to sweat. His hand gripped the edge of the table. He whispered something to his lawyer. I want to change my plea." The judge stared directly at him. "Are you saying you plead guilty?" Weller lowered his head, trembling. "Yes." The case ended with a life sentence with no parole. The man who once terrorized children was finally unmasked. But those who brought about justice were not the ones people expected. It was a 5-year-old girl who once couldn't speak, and a dog who never stopped listening. In this world, some things may seem fragile, like the silence of a child or the nod of a dog, but they carry incredible strength. This story isn't just about justice. It's a reminder that no one is too small to spark change. Loyalty, empathy, and trust can overcome even the darkest shadows. Thank you for staying with us through this journey. If this story moved you or taught you something about courage, healing, or hope, please like, modest, share, subscribe, so you don't miss the next true story that touches the heart.